My name is Valarie Kaur. I was born in Fresno, California, and I grew up in Clovis, California, on the same land my grandfather farmed. I went on to college in the Bay Area. I went to Stanford, and then I lived in Boston to go to divinity school at Harvard. And then I continued on to New Haven, where I went to Yale Law School, and I lived there for 5 years. After that, I came back to California and lived in Los Angeles ever since then. So California feels, in a way, like ancestral home, ancestral soil, because of my grandfather's great legacy here starting in 1913. So it's really important to me to raise my children here. I remember falling asleep with my grandfather next to me, and he would stroke my forehead and hum, and he would give me the Mul Mantar. Ik onkar satnam garta purik nirpo nirvadagal murit ajuni sapang good prasad jap. It's the first utterance of Sikh scripture, but Papaji would tell me all of Sikh scripture, all of the Guru Granth Sahib, everything that you need to know flows from this root verse, the Mul Mantar that was crafted by Guru Nanak. And the very beginning of that Mul Mantar is Ik Onkar, the oneness that always is ever unfolding inside of us, around us. I don't think Papaji spent a lot of time breaking it all down, but it was a felt sense in my body of being at home in the music of the words and feeling the connection between him and me and the home and the night and the moon out my window. It was that just transcendent taste. We call it to drink the sip of Amrit, the cup of nectar, is to taste that oneness. And I think that Papaji was the very first one who gave me that taste. Yeah.
Do you remember if you had an understanding of what God or the divine spirit or whatever words you may have used back then as a child might be?
I remember the first times I felt very curious about how to give language to this felt sense inside of me. I opened up our translation books, and the translations were quite odd. You know, it was Ik Onkar, instead of it being this embodied experience of oneness, it was translated as there is one God. And then there were lords and thys and salvation and kingdom and sin. It was as if, you know, my whole faith was given back to me on a platter that was just, you know, filtered through Christian terms and Christian worldview. And I could feel that it didn't quite sit well with me in my body, but I didn't yet have language for or understanding for what I was being given. So in a way, I feel like there was always this juxtaposition. It was only many years later that I began to understand that the very first English translations of our text, the Guru Granth Sahib, were done in the colonial era and were done to butter up our faith in the eyes of the British, to make us palatable, to say, look, we are monotheistic and we believe what you do. And look, and so I feel like much of my life since then has been an attempt to decolonize the text, to get back at the essence, to try to render language that more closely approximates the feeling that I had, the more mystical, transcendent experience that I had. And that's the love that Guru Nanak sang of. And more, I feel that my work in this world is to take Guru Nanak's message, Guru Nanak's medicine of love and offer it anew for a new time. And it's really an ancient call, isn't it? I mean, that kind of call to a love without limit has been on the lips of spiritual teachers, indigenous healers for thousands and thousands of years. And I feel now that our very future as a nation and as a species depends on whether we can put that love ethic into practice. So my whole life now is organized around seeding these ways of being, giving people tools, frameworks, practices to enter that kind of experience that I had as a child to make it, you know, a way of being with family, with community, as a society. You know, starting in junior high school, I went to a very mostly white conservative Christian public school, and starting in junior high school, I had a series of very aggressive confrontations with my best friends and my teachers, who tried so fervently to convert me to Christianity, saying that there was the only way I could be saved, the only way I could save my family was if I said these magic words. And I knew that, you know, I didn't know about the state of my soul, but I knew that my grandfather surely was not going to be sent to hell by any kind of God. And so I was, you know, I felt like I was defending my whole family against this worldview. But, you know, it gets inside of you. I mean, I had one woman who came and did an exorcism on me. She started just speaking in tongues and said every time I was confused, it was the devil inside of me, speaking to me. So it was almost like I was made to question even that transcendent experience that I had. Is this mine? Is this a trick? Is it? And I found myself feeling very, you know, there's a period in high school just really alone, distraught, kind of despairing. I had many, many nightmares of Judgment Day and my family being left behind and all of us going up in the flames. And it was very kind of inwardly tormented. And there was one Sunday morning where Papaji took me to the Gurdwara, the Sikh Gurdwara, and I hadn't been there in so long. I was just lost in my books trying to find the answer in the books, you know. And he sat with me, and, you know, all of Sikh experience is listening to the kirtan, listening to the songs of love, and having that experience inside of you. So as the kirtan is playing and the voices are rising, the harmonium is sounding, I look at my grandfather, his eyes are closed, he's like inside of the music. My mind is racing. I'm just thinking about my best friend and my teacher, and then I'm thinking about the priests down the street right now who are like standing up in front of the congregation to condemn us. And I started to get really angry, really furious, really furious. And almost as if in a dream, I left the Gurdwara. My grandfather's eyes were still closed. I just marched right out, and I went down the streets of Fresno, and I found the nearest church I could, and I banged on the door. And I was going to confront the priest, you know, in front of the congregation. I was just in a fever, and I opened the door, and the door opened, and there was a small, older white woman in a flowery dress, and she said, "My dear, can I help you?" And she has this look of confusion on her face, and she was the church organist. And I looked, and the pews were empty. You know, Christians finish praying earlier than we do. We're just much later. So I said, can I sit and hear you play? And she said, "Oh, yes, of course, my dear." So I sat I was looking for the exit, and she placed her fingers on the keys, and it was like 1,000 birds like lifting from a tree at once. It was just heart pounding, heart swelling, you know, being lifted up into the music, and feeling like I was traveling back in time, or perhaps up into the heavens. And there I had this image of Jesus and his arms outstretched, and then there are lines from his arms that started to make the Ik Onkar of our faith, that the oneness that always is, this beautiful canopy over like the whole sky, over the whole universe. And my tears are just streaming down my face. And the woman stops playing, and she turns to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I gathered myself together. I mean, I just had that experience, that transcendent taste that I had longed for, that I hadn't had since I was a kid, in a Christian church. I'd gone to like do battle, and the church had transformed into my sanctuary, into my vehicle for... And I looked at her and I said, "I just can't believe in a God that would send me to hell." And I was ready for a, you know. And she said, "Well, I can't either." And she kind of laughed, and she said, "Well, there's some people who don't agree, of course." Her name was Faye, and I began to sob into her shoulder, and she hugged me, and She was the first Christian I had met who did not think I was going to hell. And we sat in the space on the margins, you know, and we talked for a long time, and it was, she didn't have to open that door to let me in. I didn't have to walk through it. But in that meeting place, there was medicine that she had to give me. And it returned me to myself.
How do you understand God today, or how do you call that presence today, if you even call it, or what's your understanding today of that transcendent sacred spirit?
My daughter and I go on walks every Friday morning to the ocean. And she's so full of wonder. And so we look at the ducks and the ants and the trees, and we say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. We sing a song. You're a part of me I don't yet know. Wonder Baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know. Oh, to me, that invitation to see everything around us, this flower, this table, this sky, this beautiful person sitting across me as a part of me I do not yet know. When I sink into that truth of our oneness, then I experience God. And I fall in love. All of love, all of my love flows from that. The moments when I touch that deep wellspring inside of each of us, we just forget what we were born knowing, what my daughter knows. So that's why my work now is to invite people to see no stranger and to recover what we once knew. And I don't even have to use the word God anymore. People have all different words, thousands of different words for that experience. But to connect to that experience, to say this is your birthright, and from that experience, there's a way of being that comes from that, a way of orienting to all the animals and all the earth and all the human beings that stand in the truth that separateness is an illusion. I think that way of being is what will save the world.
That way of being, not that being.
Correct.
Beautiful.
We are God. We are the most, as far as we know, the most conscious part of God, knowing itself. You know, and when we react out of our fear, aggression, reaction, you know, just mindlessly, thoughtlessly, then we're not, you know. But when we take moments to let in our internal spaciousness and conjure up our deepest wisdom, you know, when we take a breath and decide to wonder, to listen across lines of difference, to reimagine, we are, you know, the most conscious part of God reimagining the universe. Like, God is imagining through us. And that's why I still have hope in a way. As dark as it is, as much as it feels like everything is unraveling, we live in such a convulsive, catastrophic era in history. We don't know if we're going to make it. I keep saying the future is dark. Is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? And it is a question. Like, will this be, you know, will America devolve into a kind of civil war, or will we birth a multiracial democracy? Will our species end within a few generations, or will we birth a sustainable way of being with the earth? For all the data that points to how dark it is, how much ash I can taste in my mouth, I still lift my gaze and I see people who have no obvious reason to love one another come together, take each other's hands, weep with each other, grieve with each other, organize with each other, serve each other, love each other. And in those moments, I see the finest expression of God, of what we could be when we stand in the truth of our oneness.
Do you recall the first time in your life that you feel like you had to rely upon your understanding of God, that way of being?
Truly, it took a very long time to understand how to reclaim that experience in me, and that I would not survive if I didn't. It was, as an activist coming out of college after 9/11, my whole life, I wasn't planning to become an activist. A family friend, Balbir Singh Sodhi, was the first person killed in a hate crime after 9/11. A Sikh American father killed for his turban and beard. These very things that we wear to express our commitment to love and serve others is what has marked us as terrorists in this country. And so I was a kid in college, and so I just was catalyzed by his murder and grabbed my camera, began to cross the country, going from home to home, city to city. Sometimes when the blood was still fresh on the ground, I would be capturing these stories, and their pain was so much more acute than mine that I learned to minimize my pain. I learned just to, I thought I just had to push and push and push and push and push, that I was only as good or as worthy as my ability to produce and how fast I produced and how much I served. And fast forward, it took, the onset of the 2016 election season. Hate violence began to skyrocket once again, rivaling what we saw after 9/11. But this time I was a mother. I had just given birth to my son, and I was putting him to bed at night and just feeling like I had failed. Like, what was it all for? He's growing up in a nation more dangerous for him than it was for me. And that's when I began to hear the voice in my head, which I now call the little critic. It's the voice that says you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, you're not enough. And that voice was strong in me in that period of time. I kept hearing, like, I can't live in this world, I'm not strong enough. And I heard it several times, and that's when, how many activists, how many women of color who are activists get sick, opt out, their lives are taken, or they take their own lives. I think I could have been one of them, but I was lucky that I had a community around me, and it was my husband who said, okay, what do we do? We're going to do something now. So we left the country. We left the country. I had a gift that very few women in my position ever receive. I had a room of my own. We went to the rainforest, and I had a little room at the top of the mountain overlooking the ocean. And it was there I began to write my first book, See No Stranger. But really, I went there to save my own life. It was the first time I could take breath in my body and feel it. The rainforest is warm and wet and generative. It was like being in the womb of the earth. It was like being in the womb of God. And only then could I take a breath so deep, like I'd been pushing, I didn't know how to breathe. And it was in the rainforest that I learned how to breathe, and I could return to my wonder. I could walk through the rainforest and feel the roots beneath the soil connecting. And then I was part of this amazing ecosystem, the cicadas and the trees and the toucans and the monkeys and the rain coming down in sheets, and the rain itself, the sound of that rain, I think saved me. It was giving me breath, reminding me of the oneness that always is, and that you could marvel at it, no matter how brutal that the world is or becomes. This is also true. The wonder and the beauty and the grandeur that we are surrounded by is just as real as the rest of it. And so I learned the wisdom of the midwife. She doesn't say push, she says breathe, my love, and then push and then breathe again. There's a kind of cadence, a kind of rhythm to sustaining one's energy over any long labor. The labor of raising a family, or running an organization, or building a movement, rebirthing a nation. So I came back to this country having learned how to breathe. And now I feel like I taste that transcendent, you know, I taste that cup of nectar. I taste God on a daily basis. I finally learned how sometimes it's just seconds. You know, in the morning when the children are on top of me, it's like, oh my gosh, especially if, you know, husband is away, like, all right, I have to wrestle them, you know, out of these pajamas into their clothes. I have to get them to brush their teeth. I have to like put food in their bodies and then grab the backpacks. Don't forget the water bottles. And then, you know, in the car to get them to school on time. Like it is so, but there are some mornings where I'm nursing my daughter, and instead of letting my mind run, I'm looking at her and my body is turning blood into milk that is going into her body, which is turning the milk back into blood. And she's looking at me with one open eye, and I can feel the warmth of her skin and the morning light. And then suddenly, where do I begin? And she ends, you know, I sink and I taste that oneness that always is. Like I am, you know. And then 2 seconds later, my armpits start to itch, because they always do when I nurse, and I don't know why, but right? That amazing, electrifying, just vertical liberation, that taste of oneness, it lasted maybe 2 to 3 seconds, but you know what? That is all you need. Those moments are available to us all of the time. You know, you don't have to go to the mountain and sit for years in meditation and then have the big waking. And, you know, some of us might get that. Maybe my rainforest moment was like that. But you could also get that through the small wakings, the small moments of transcendence. It used to be drawing close to so much violence. I stay in such close proximity to trauma and violence. I was just with a family in Merced, in my hometown, my home valley, a few weeks ago, that the entire family had been kidnapped and murdered in an orchard, including an 8-month-old baby girl. And sitting with that family and grieving with them, that grief was just so familiar. How many families have I grieved with in the last 20 years that have suffered in the face of racial violence or gun violence? And that used to be the hardest part, because I didn't understand that if I'm going to expose myself to this much grief and hold this much grief with people, that I need to deepen my capacity to hold that much pleasure and hold that much joy. And I thought, like, because I was drawing close here, I couldn't allow myself to let joy in. And now I've finally learned that call of my faith called Chardvikala. Chardvikala, it's not hopefulness or, you know, an escapist kind of joy. Chardvikala is ever rising spirits, even in darkness. Ever rising joy, even in the thick of labor. We say to each other, are you in Chardvikala? Like, are you in, it's almost like being in the current, and the current is carrying you, and it's a sparkling energy that comes from the ground up. The world won't give it to you, but if you plug into the earth and find it from the bottom up, the pleasure of being alive, are you in Chardvikala? So now I know if I'm going to go and I'm going to grieve that deeply with people, that the next night I better be dancing with my children. I better be throwing them up in the air. I better be paying attention to their faces. I better be letting that joy flood my body. And now it's become like two wells carving the other out. Like the deeper that the grief carves me out, the deeper my capacity to hold joy. The deeper that I let pleasure carve me out, the deeper my capacity to hold grief. That took me a long time to learn. And now, so the solution is not to shut your heart down, but to let your heart be a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more it expands. And I think that is the test of resilience, or the definition of resilience. It's not at the static, steady state. It's like very much deeply going in and moving through the grief, the rage, the pleasure, the joy, the wonder, always returning to center. That's what I've come to understand as sovereignty. And that took me 20 years to learn. So now, honestly, the hardest part of my work is to figure out how to stay well when the children are on top of my, like, I mean, literally, like, I wake up with them on top of my head. They're sitting on my head. So to show up, you know, and mother them really well, like to mother my children as I'm mothering the movement, at a point when both are really big, you know, to have them being so young and to have the moment in history being so critical, I have found that keeping myself well in the really simple ways, getting the sleep, you know, drinking the hot tea, having a few hours on Friday afternoons to sit in my own contemplative practice, which I call sovereign time. Like those, keeping myself well in this torrential season of my life is the thing that I'm practicing now. This home that I've been able to co-create with my husband, you know, for generations into the foggy distance, there has been trauma and dysfunction passed along from all those massive acts of violence that the Sikh community has survived, that my lineage has survived. And that shows up in, you know, ugly ways inside of a house through domestic violence or gender inequity or like ways that we're not fully caring for each other. And I feel very grateful that because of my mother, because of how much she worked to set me free of all of that, that I get to be the first in my line, the first woman who, in my line of all the mothers who came before me, who could really craft a life of wellness and meaning for herself and her family with an equal partner. As my children are screaming. You can see that our time is coming up to coming to an end in a moment. I believe revolutionary love is the call of our times. And that love is a birthright, that it is a wellspring that lives inside of each of us. And if anything that I have shared resonates, it's just uncovering a wisdom that is already inside of you. Each of us has a role to play, and that no matter how dark and difficult our lives might get or this world might get, that we can be the light that we want to give. And in doing so, we can be beacons of love for ourselves and others. And that love is revolutionary because it presages the world to come. I have finally found the wise woman in me. The little critic has been loud for a long time. I think a lot of us hear that voice, and I'm lucky that my grandfather, my mother, my family projected the wise woman in me, the woman who says, "Oh, my love, like you are brave enough." I see her now sitting on the throne in my mind, and I have crowned her. And I think if I can lead from my deepest wisdom and offer medicine to the world with power, with grace, with invitation and integrity and joy, then perhaps that might invite people to imagine what it feels like to lead from their deepest wisdom and make their offering from that same space of sovereignty and love.